guys, I'm Layla. Welcome to Raid Lore Stories. Today's lore story is going to be for Queen Eva, going along with Call of the Arbiter. In the Call of the Arbiter series, we see her not looking like this, but as a normal high elf. So today's lore story, we're going to see how she transforms into this. So I hope you enjoy. Long ago, the high elves and dark elves were one people. The elves of Aravia, the oldest and most powerful kingdom in Teleria. But after centuries of proud resistance against the forces of darkness during the Age of Hellfire, a spirit called the Dream Walker unmade it all. It spoke with countless elves in their sleep, promising them power, knowledge, beauty, and truth. It gave them magic and wisdom, but all of it was tainted. The Dreamwalker's gifts turned to poison in time, and when the Arbiter came to Aravia, she saw it was the work of Seroth. The then king of Aravia called the first ever conclave of the elves, but his attempts to quell the followers of the Dreamwalker only alienated them. War followed, with a side split between the king's loyalists, the High Elves, and those who followed the Dreamwalker, the Dark Elves. Decades of brutal violence only ended with a second intervention by the Arbiter, this time with an army at her back. She forced a second conclave of the elves, but it failed to unite the elven people, only separating the two sides, the High Elves in Aravia and the Dark Elves in the neighboring forests of Durham. It was an act that was meant to end the War of the Elves. Instead, it merely changed its flavor. Conflict sputtered between Aravia and Durham for more than 100 years. Sometimes the fighting was in the shadows, sometimes it was in the field, but the violence and hatred never stopped. Still, it never came close to full-scale war, until the king of Aravia was killed on a punitive expedition into Durham. Had the Arabian throne been succeeded by a warmonger, the violence would have been terrible. But instead, the next monarch was his daughter, Eva. Queen Eva had dreamed often of a world without war between the High Elves and Dark Elves. Her answer to the constant fighting was twofold: the construction of a great wall and a new conclave. Both would cause the war to change again. The wall was intended to end the cycle of violence. It would not be guarded by High Elves, but by Ogren and Skinwalker auxiliaries, second-class citizens in the eye of the High Elves, and thus their deaths defending Aravia would not provoke so much anger in its people. Meanwhile, the conclave would allow dialogue between the High and Dark Elves for the first time in centuries. That wall became known by its designer, Felwyn, and its construction had the desired outcome, but Queen Eva's Grand Conclave did not. Most of the dialogue was little more than shouting and accusations, and there was little cooperation. More conclaves were held, dozens, as the years rolled by, but unity remained out of reach. Indeed, more than once Queen Eva had to contend with assassins from the Dark Elves and even her own people. However, the skill of her guards and her own courage won out over her enemies, and, over many decades, the elves of both realms came to regard conclaves as preferable to battle. It was a victory, if incomplete. As time dragged on, however, and the queen grew older, she feared that time would steal her victory away. If achieving true peace should take longer than the span of her life, a more militant successor would quickly undo all her work. Queen Eva's quest took on a more desperate tenor, and ultimately, she reached out to the Dreamwalker. Queen Eva discovered that the secretive spirit was more than happy to teach her what he knew. But of course, as in the days of old, the Dreamwalker's lessons held a poisonous edge. He turned Queen Eva's desperation, measure by measure, into paranoia. Peace remained her mission, but the Dreamwalker whispered of conspiracy, and the queen, growing desperate, believed him. In her mind, her enemies quickly multiplied, first within the Elven courts, then among the realms of her neighbors. Peace with Durham would no longer be enough. All of Anhalt would need to be tamed. It was at this point in history that King Teba of Karok shattered centuries of peace and attacked his Erwalf's allies in the Free Cities. It was precisely the provocation the Dreamwalker had warned of. At Queen Eva's furious command, Aravia struck at Karok with all its might. Alliances be damned. If Queen Eva could not persuade the powers of Anhalt to accept peace with diplomacy, she would bring peace at the edge of a sword. Okay, I gotta say, this was a pretty good story. I really wasn't sure what to expect with Queen Eva, but I do like how it really does fit along with Call of the Arbiter. It kind of explains how, she has really, really good intentions for her people, and basically it's fear that causes her to reach out to the Dreamwalker, who's Seroth, and she probably doesn't know that. And that's what basically ends up transforming her into this Queen Eva that we know in game. Guys, drop me some comments down below what you think of the lore story for Queen Eva, and thanks so much for watching.